Thanks so much, Alicia. Sandra, you want to welcome everyone?
Yeah, and great to have everybody here. I'm really excited that you've come, and Mark and I are really looking forward to sharing this material with you, and and hope that you get some really practical advice that you can bring to the fields right away and start to implement. So welcome everybody, and thank you again for taking the time to invest in yourself.
And I also want to echo what Feeney said. It's so impressive to see 500 people on a Thursday night taking time out of their day to spend with us to be better referees or better coaches, whatever capacity you're in. So let's go ahead and get started. So I guess I'm wearing the pro hat in this, but we're all in this together. U.S. Soccer and Pro. We want to have, as you watch tonight, and keep this in the back of your head, an overriding theme of protecting the image of the game. So you're going to see a lot of clips tonight involving the professional game. And we do that because the footage is good. We have multiple angles and things like that. But keep in mind the environment you're in. Maybe you're not doing those professional games. You're doing the semi-professional ones, the UPSL, NPSL, whatever has an L in it, or you have the amateur or the youth game. Think about some of the things we're going to look at tonight, and do we really want to have those things happen on our field? So keep in mind the environment of the games and the support from the leagues creates slight modifications in Dissent. So we do have an overriding theme of this, but there are some slight nuances, and this next slide will highlight that. So I'm going to start on the pro side because this is my 9-to-5 job. For those of you who know, Pro oversees 6 organized leagues, and the last couple of years, Dissent's been a league initiative, and the leagues have really supported it. In doing that, we've kind of centralized our communication and also our education to the referees to make sure we're addressing this. So we do have this as a point of emphasis. Every league that we service does this, so much so it starts in a preseason meeting, and then in every game there's a captain's meeting and a pregame meeting, which this is reinforced. So this is something that the pro leagues are seeing weekly. There's also the professional aspect. When the players do not abide by the Dissent initiatives, there's the hit by my pocket attitude. And what we mean by that is, again, we have the league support. These players and staff members, when they do dissent, there are consequences to that. So they could potentially be fined. And another thing that we have that's a benefit at the pro level, we've already discussed some of these things with the stadiums and the support staff. So they know the expectations as well. And it's kind of easy when we go back and work with the referees. We can have some video evidence and even in some capacity, sometimes audio to show that there's dissent. So we're pretty fortunate at the pro level that we have the support of the leagues and there's an understanding of the expectation in terms of dissent. Well, not to say when we put our U.S. soccer hat on and we start talking about the hundreds of leagues, whether they're youth, they're amateur, we don't have the same expectations, but there's just not the communication going forward. But I do want to bring to your attention the revised U.S. soccer referee abuse policy. And we hope some of the themes that we talk about tonight blend into that in case it goes over the top and we need to take action. Need to keep in mind, the players we're talking about here, they're not professionals. If you're talking in the amateur world, these are probably some players that just want to keep playing and then they got to go to work on Monday. Or if we're talking about the youth game, they're probably trying to impress coaches to aspire to maybe get a college scholarship. So the discipline factor might be a little bit different. So what does that mean? Do we need to have to take more? No. But we need to have a feel for the game. We need to be mindful of our environments. Is it one of these places where we're in an isolated field and we maybe need to do what we need to do to survive the game? So think about, and we'll really get into this later, does the player need the card for dissent, or maybe does the game need it? Do we want to go back to protecting the image of the game? Where we look at the professional livelihood, the hit my pocket attitude, think about then the experience level when we get into the hundreds of leagues we're talking about with U.S. soccer. It's more of the Sunday soccer attitude. They're out there to play the game, have a good time, and go home. And we all know sometimes the players, their version of having a good time takes it over the top and it's not appropriate. Again, we talked about the environment, the open fields, and this is what really makes it tough. Sometimes when we get these players who go over the top and coaches as well, there's no evidence. It's getting better with the iPhones capturing it and the VOs and the Spideos, but sometimes it becomes my word against yours. But we still don't need to tolerate and take these actions that some of the things we're going to see tonight. So Matt, if we could continue. So again, this is a point of emphasis, not only for pro, but you just heard Carrie say we want to take this forward with the games we're talking about with U.S. soccer. So just to make sure we're clear here, we want to make sure that we empower our referees to deal with it. So as you know, in the laws of the game, part of Law 12, dissent is defined as a public protest or disagreement, whether verbal and or physical, with a match official's decision, which is punishable by a yellow card. And keep in mind, it's not just the words. It's the also dissent by action, and it can also be both. So let's make sure we have an understanding in terms of law, what we're talking about here with dissent. If we could continue, Matt. So the impact of dissent. This is something we need to really address, because I think we haven't for a while, and maybe we've gotten to a point where now it needs to become to the forefront here. So look at some of the things that dissent creates. It disrupts play, all right? Think about every decision being contested by a player or a coach. We don't need that. And when this happens, it erodes the referee's authority. It escalates the tension. When we see this and we don't deal with it, it spreads, it becomes contagious. So that's why, again, we want to empower our referees to deal with this. Think about the reaction that we get from the touchline that spills outside the touchline. This gives the negative spectator reaction. If we see players dissenting and it's not dealt with, this gives the notion that the spectators can do this. And one other thing I want us to really keep in mind, this is not only towards the referee. This is more also geared towards assistant referees and the fourth official. So don't think that they're immune to this as well. They also need to address this as well. So Matt, before we go to our next slide, I'd like for our participants tonight in the chat, if you would, could you please tell me, just think of one or two things, a short word or phrase. Why? Why do you think players dissent? Let's take a minute to see what kind of responses we get.
And Mark, just before we go to some of those responses, I'll just give it a minute, but I wanted to address that the points on this slide are really kind of these external things from the outside looking in of what the impact of dissent is. But we also want to acknowledge you as the referees, regardless of what experience level you have, there's also an internal component of the impact of dissent on yourself when you are either a referee or an assistant referee, or especially a fourth official, because you have nowhere to run. You can't run away from it anywhere. You're sort of stuck there. And so we understand that the impact of dissent not only erodes the referee authority from the outside looking in, but you might feel that yourself, that your own authority is being eroded. And it's very natural to have some of these kind of acute stress responses, both physical and psychological, where you feel like you can't tell where sound is coming from, and your heart rate goes up and your breathing gets more rapid. And those are there's a lot of other kind of internal impacts of that, of dissent, because they are causing an acute stress response. Please know that those responses, whether they're physical or psychological, are first of all completely normal. So what we could talk about in another session are some of the ways that we can kind of control that. How do we control those acute stress responses in the moment? But it's also important for us to know what our triggers are. And if we know what our triggers are that increase our heart rate, increase our breathing rates, increase our blood pressure, make us maybe say things back impulsively, knowing those triggers is the first step to helping you just kind of breathe, stay calm, and maintain your composure. Okay, so a couple of things internally. We won't get into that too much tonight, but I did just want to acknowledge that the impact of dissent on you while you are officiating is also very real. And understanding your own responses is the first step in starting to control them, right? And the idea here is to maintain your composure as best you can, breathe, and know that if you have a little bit more time than it feels like for you to be able to either address it in the moment or to get the attention of the referee, if you're on the line or a fourth official, to have dissent dealt with.
Okay, good. And again, that these are all natural responses as Feeney talked about. So we do have this version of Zoom, which the chat is disabled. That's okay. But a lot of you did put some responses in the Q&A, which is fine. And a lot of the responses that I saw are words like frustration. Players don't know the laws of the game. They're doing it to win and compete or to be competitive. I think that's a good one. Sometimes it's just a thing to maybe get the next call, to mess with the ref. I think that kind of ties into that notion of getting the next call. So a lot of the things I think that we mentioned in the Q&A here, let's see if these were things that we kind of came up with on our next slide here. So again, here's this notion of wanting to win the next decision. And why do players want to do that, or how do they do that? They make the official feel uncomfortable. They lose control of their emotions. So I saw again something in the Q&A that was a common response, the notion of frustration. Yeah, that's going to be part of it, but also let's not take that over the top, but also let's also protect the image of their game. That's one of the things we're going to have as our overriding themes tonight. They do this also to distract and disrupt the referee's concentration and decision making. Again, we need to be composed, and we need to be maybe a little bit assertive when dealing with this. So we'll a little bit later talk about body language and things like that. But I think one of the big ones here, and I think a lot of you mentioned this in the Q&A, was to make the referees second guess themselves. And again, Feeney talked to you about some of the physiological responses to that. Players are not foolish. They know that that's part of this thing that they can do to maybe win that next decision. So a lot of the things we see on this slide are a lot of the things that you saw in the Q&A. So that's, I think, something we realize, and hopefully now we can deal with it, and we want to empower you with U.S. Soccer to deal with it. So Matt, if we could continue. All right, Feeney, this one's all yours.
Great, thank you very much. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take a look at a range of player responses. And what I mean by player responses are different types of forms of dissent. The main topic here is dissent, which requires a yellow card. And we're also going to explore a little bit of what are some of the responses just below that, and what are some of the responses that go above and beyond that towards a red card. Okay, so Matt, you can go ahead and advance the slide here. And this idea of we have dissent as one of our anchors, and then we have some things that are below, that's this first point. So not all verbal or physical responses to referees are considered dissent where you need a yellow card. There's a lot of range that comes just below that we term an emotional outburst or an emotional response. And then there's some other responses that are above dissent that you get onto the right side of that spectrum that fall into the offensive, insulting, or abusive language or actions. So what we want to do tonight is really help you sort out when you see these visual cues or hear these, auditory cues. We won't have so many auditory cues. We're going to focus more on visual cues, is to be able to identify those actions correctly, put them in the appropriate sort of bucket, if you will, the appropriate section of the spectrum, and then we'll provide some tools of how do we deal with it when it's kind of in those in-between places. And those in-between places where you have those dotted lines are what we often call the gray areas. So if I can kind of go back, and if you recall Mark's initial comments regarding some of the nuances between U.S. Soccer and Pro, for those of you doing the youth game, those in-between things are a little more narrow. There's a little bit less discretion. At the youth level, we want to be a little bit stronger there to respond to cases of dissent. And similarly, even though this might be counterintuitive, at the pro level, there's also actually relatively less tolerance for dissent. The reasons are different than they are at the youth level, but the concepts are the same. At the amateur level, that's maybe where we have a little bit more, those in-between areas are a little bit wider. They don't cover the entire section of Dissent, right? They're just maybe a little bit wider, those gray areas, than what they would be at the youth or professional level. Okay, and we'll give some examples as we go through the clips on those things. Okay, so let's start with the more of the left side of that spectrum with emotional outbursts and responses. So we have some visual and verbal cues that go into that. Matt, let's go ahead and, yep, perfect. So these are what you had in the Q&A regarding frustration. One of the really important visual cues is that it's immediate and then it stops. So it's not sustained, it isn't extended, it doesn't go on for a long length of time in there. And those two together are a really kind of a key cue for you that this is an emotional outburst or response. Oftentimes, it's going to be kind of this immediate reaction or result to a referee decision. And in the cases of frustration, it may have nothing to do with the referee at all. It might be the player's own action, where they missed, as we've all seen, a sitter right in front of goal and they sky it over the bar. So you might see this emotional outburst of frustration. And it might be from a teammate's action where a teammate misses a sitter or didn't make that pass, right? Or it could be just something that spills over from the atmosphere along the touch lines, or if you're in a stadium setting from there, that ends up spilling over onto the field, right? Some other visual cues is that it's not severely aggressive. I know that's an abstract kind of concept, but we'll see several visual examples of that where it's not severely aggressive. It's not directed right at the official, and it's not personal, it's not public, and it's not provocative. Now, keep in mind, these points are not completely independent of each other. They can all interact in different ways. But using these visual cues is going to be really helpful for you, especially when you're looking at professional video. Don't worry so much about the environment of the professional game. Focus on the concepts. Focus on the visual cues that we're talking about here. Identify those in the video, and that way you'll be able to transfer those visual cues into your own game at the youth level, okay, or the adult amateur level, if that's the levels that you're doing. Okay, let's go ahead and look at our first example. And I think what one of the things that I really like about this clip is that the referee call is completely correct. that doesn't mean you're not going to get a little bit of frustration coming from the players. Okay, so that's absolutely possible. But let's focus on the visual cues here. So in response to a referee decision, despite the fact that it's correct, it's immediate, it's not sustained. The hand just kind of flicks up. And it's not overly aggressive. The player is running away from the official as they do this kind of little flick. So again, immediate, not sustained or lengthy, not directed at the referee, and not severely aggressive. And when we say not severely aggressive, one of the reasons we're saying that is because he's going away from the referee. He's not coming into the referee's face. He's not running at the referee. So running away makes us say that this is more on the less aggressive side. So this is an example of an emotional outburst. It's a reaction to a referee decision. It's quick. It's not extended. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the next example. Okay. And if you look at the top right, it gives you a good look. So this one is coming up the spectrum just a little bit, right? But we see some very similar visual cues that we did in the first one. Again, a correct referee decision, but it's in response to that. It's quick, it's not extended or lengthy. It's a little more robust maybe in the body language, but eventually the player runs away. So again, those visual cues all put together, put this into that more of the left part of the spectrum in that emotional outburst category. Now, all of this is not to say that we don't deal with it. All of this is not to say that we ignore it. What we're saying here is that the referee still needs to address it, still needs to respond to it, but it's not, it doesn't meet the threshold to warrant a yellow card for dissent. Okay, so I want to make sure we understand that distinction is that just because it doesn't meet those kind of criteria, if you like, for dissent to produce a yellow card, it doesn't mean that we ignore it. And one thing we want to emphasize in this webinar is that you are empowered to act here. You are empowered to give a response. And you might be not sure exactly how to respond with that. You might not be sure exactly what to say. That's okay. We're going to, as we get later into the webinar, we're going to explore what are some possibilities of how you can respond to this. Okay, but in the meantime, this is the bucket that it goes into, is emotional outburst. Okay, this next clip, let's take a look here. So again, this is just inching up that spectrum a little bit. Again, visual cues compared to the other clips. The body language is, again, a little more robust than what we saw in that first clip. It extends a little bit longer than we saw in the first and the second clips. But what we also see to keep this in the emotional outburst bucket is that it's relatively immediate. It doesn't extend for a long time. A little longer than the other ones, but not for a long time. Also, the player is not coming at the referee. So their frustration, even though they're facing the referee, they're not coming at them. They're not closing the distance. So we still would say this is not severely aggressive. Again, a little bit more of a gray area, and this might be more of an example of the kind of the differing level of gray between the US soccer levels, especially the amateur level, and the youth and the pro together. So maybe a little bit of maybe management, and also look at the time of the game, right? This is the very end of the game. Frustration levels in general are a little bit higher. So if you're doing kind of that amateur game, we still need this managed. Okay, we cannot be stoic and just ignore it. We still need to have some management here. At the youth level, or at the pro level, if you feel, given other, the game circumstances, that a yellow card is warranted, that would be supported here. So this is really in that in-between where that dotted line was between emotional outburst and dissent. Okay, the amateur level, we understand that gray area may be a little wider and you may choose to manage it. At the youth level, just like you might see on TV with the professional level, you may see yellow cards given for this, and those would absolutely be supported because you are empowered to do that. Okay, but in all cases, we need to have some referee responses and manage the player to show that that kind of behavior isn't acceptable. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. And Mark, I'm going to send this back over to you.
You got it. Thank you, Feeny. And as you saw there, Feeney did a great job of talking about that gray area. But now we're going to transition into things that are expected to be a yellow card for dissent. And look, I get it. A lot of times, if we were to play a
I think we have a little bit of a web interruption or internet interruption. You still good there, Mark?
I'm good. Can you not hear me? We good? Okay. So again, as I was saying, Feeney did a great job talking about the gray areas of the dissent. We're going to get more into the concrete examples of dissent in which a yellow card will be expected. So some of the things to consider here is that if it becomes personal, public, and provocative, doesn't have to be all three, but one of the three, then we need to, again, deal with it. And we're going to give you some examples of this with some visual and verbal cues. So don't just think that dissent is always going to be by word. Think about the actions of the player or players as well. So if a player comes at you from distance, running from a distance to confront a match official, and they're doing it more of an aggressive manner, this pendulum we're talking about, that's not in the gray area. That's going to be more towards the yellow card. They don't have to run from a distance, but if a player is approaching you or confronting you in an aggressive manner, maybe it's with the finger pointing and it's looking at you and it's prolonged, not the thing that we just saw with some of the players that was quick, then this needs to be punished with a yellow card. Again, let me come back to our second slide. Our overriding image, we want to protect the image of the game. Is it visual? Again, I gave the example of pointing, but what about the waving of the arms, making disrespectful actions or gestures? We need to deal with that, and it needs to be with a yellow card. This is something at the professional level that we've tried to really nip in the bud, but we're seeing this a little bit down at the semi-professional level, and I haven't really seen it at some of the youth tournaments I've been at, but if it happens, we need to act with it. If there are 3 or more players confronting a match official, if they are mobbing them, this is not permissible. So again, deal with it accordingly. Pick the most aggressive player in that scenario, give the yellow card, and we'll have an example of that. Think about, again, what we talked about with the duration. Feeney showed the example with the St. Louis player who did this and ran up the field. It wasn't very long, but if it becomes sustained and lengthy, not the one and done, kind of like we saw with that St. Louis player in our first video example, again, the expectation will be a yellow card. And the last one, it's not a reaction. They had time to think about it. Soccer is an emotional game. Like Feeney mentioned, they might have shanked one and now they're frustrated. But if it's more of a looking at you and it's prolonged, that's when it becomes calculated. And again, the expectation from U.S. Soccer is we need to deal with this with a yellow card. So we're going to give you some examples of this. So now maybe you can think back to some of your games if you've had some of these situations, and maybe we have a change in mindset. Maybe you deal with it differently. Let's look at the first one. If you could play it, please. So as you see here up on the replay, number 8 in red here, prolonged, aggressive, coming at the referee. We should not tolerate this. The expectation here needs to be a yellow card. So again, watch as the number 8 in red there comes from distance. It's aggressive, use of the hands and the arms in a disrespectful manner, and the referee correctly punishes with a yellow card. This is the expectation. Let's be sure we follow this going forward. Excellent. If we could go to the next one. Okay? If we watch the replay here, look at what happens. We look back at the referee a second time. We're waving the arms, all of the gestures that we've been talking about. the expectation here again is indeed the yellow card. We should not tolerate this, and we are empowering you to act on this. And the expectation with acting on this one is, in fact, a yellow card. So again, we look at the body, the hams, the arms. It's not quick. It's sustained. We give the yellow card here. And that's our last example. Notice how the player in red, number 15 here, comes from distance. Look at number 10 here in red and black, coming from distance. So as we look at these two again, I highlighted to you on purpose because I really wanted you to see this illustration of these players running from a distance. We need to act with this. If they come running at a distance, they come to your close proximity as the referee, they are aggressive, please deal with this with the yellow card. And in the second video we saw as part of this montage here, notice how not only did number 10 approach the referee from a distance, but we had some of his teammates start to mob the referee. We like the fact that number 10 gets the yellow card because he was the most aggressive one, as well as he came from the distance to Dissent. So we, again, at US Soccer are employing you to deal with this with the yellow card if these actions happen in your matches. Excellent. Matt, if we could continue. So look, not everything is a yellow card. Within Law 12, there is offensive, insulting, abusive language, and it doesn't have to be a build-up to this. So if one of these types of actions happen, the expectation is that you send the player off. So we need to identify the behaviors. And again, some of the visual verbal cues of this include, it doesn't have to be a 4-letter word. It could be a racial, religious, ethnic, gender-based comment that is inappropriate. This is not a yellow card. This is indeed a red card, and it's falling under the bucket of offensive, insulting, abusive language or actions. Any acceptable language, I think that's something we're accustomed to. That's your what we think are customary, unacceptable 4-letter words. I don't think we have an issue with that, but let's start thinking about that first bullet there. Also, it doesn't have to be the 4-letter word. What about words that attack